With our committee agenda, our first item is a fairly simple, straightforward, quick, but we shall see what the committee wishes to do, and that is approval of the minutes from February the 5th, 6th, 7th, 13th, and 14th, and 19th and 20th. So again, those dates 5, 6, 7, 13, 14, 19, 20. The minutes were emailed in the past, so you've had an opportunity to see the minutes, and so we will look for approval of the minutes. Unless you don't like the minutes, then we can just move. Okay, Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
There's a motion by Senator Fagg, seconded by Senator Ware. Question, comments on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Committee, we have legislation that we heard last week, and so I will give you opportunity to find it in your folder. It is substitute for House Bill 2168. After the hearing and looking at the legislation, and realizing that the House has a position because this legislation has passed the House, I will admit the chair is not a real big fan of reducing the fee, so I'm going to offer a conceptual amendment, which is very simple, is the reason I say conceptual rather than asking the reviser to provide a balloon, and I realized I left my notes in the office. Yeah, I'd been in the president's office and just barely got here, but the all right, they would be on page 3, line 27. The dollar amount as passed the House is $500. There's another place that's... Okay, thank you. Okay, and again, I apologize. I left my notes in my office. Otherwise, I'd have had it a little bit simpler. We are on, for those of you that arrived, is substitute for House Bill 2168, which we had a hearing on last week. And again, the House has a position because this has passed the House to get a Senate position. I've got a conceptual motion, which is fairly simple. On page 3, line 27, the dollar amount would be changed to $800, and then on page 4, line 2, the dollar amount would be changed to $800. So the reason that I'm doing this primarily is the fee currently and the license fee and then the registration fees are much higher than the $500. We heard from the department that even with the upper fees, without additional hemp producers, they will run out of funds for the program. Dropping it down to $500 make them run out of the funds for the program significantly sooner. So I guess I thought $800 was a good compromise. If the committee wishes a different amount, that will be up to the committee. But I'm going to make a motion to change those two numbers from $500 to $800 on page 3 and page 4. Again, line 27 and line 2. So that is a motion. Is there a second? Second by Senator McGinn. Discussion on the motion to amend. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And visiting after the committee last week or earlier this week, I believe the department said there was an even more decreased number of applicants for hemp growers. Do we have an updated number, or can we get that number from the department?
We had gotten an email, and again, I left my notes in my office, I apologize. The number is fairly low. I don't know if any committee remembers what that was. Did you print off the email, Patty?
Was it 26, or is it higher now? 26, that's what I'm hearing.
Yes. Okay. So, yes, it's an issue. We could leave it where it is, but, and trying to work with the House and with the growers, I came up with a number different from the House, but different from current law. Go ahead, Senator Straub, the floor is yours. Are you finished? Okay. Senator McGinn.
Well, and it's going to go to conference, so you can continue to have that conversation, so.
Thank you. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, what I was hearing was that one of the reasons there are so few growers jumping in now is because the fees are so high. And then there's another issue. Can I continue on a little bit different tangent that has to do with fees?
The floor is yours. You
Thank you.
can wish, if you wish, we're kind of trying to stick to this amendment, but if you wish to sidetrack briefly, I'll give you some latitude.
Thank you. As to fees and the whole concept, frankly, what I was hearing from our conferees is that their preference, and I'd be willing to make a small guess that even the department's preference, would be to move it out of ag and into the USDA and let it be the Fed's issue, and then under their structure, which would lower the fees and have sufficient oversight.
Additional comments on Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we've taken a product that actually had been and continues to be very useful. Hemp was always a fiber, rope, fabric, an important commodity, and we've tried to put, I think, unnecessary regulations around it. So I was compelled by the testimony that we had that it's not necessary to collect these fees. Again, I think if we could manage this a few more years and really work to see if we could move to the USDA oversight, then we wouldn't need to collect those fees. We did see that initially more was collected than necessary, and I'd like to spend down that money before we increase fees. Or, I mean, I appreciate that you are lowering that fee, but 600?
We're not in a bidding war yet. Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Ware said USDA. Is it legal? I mean, I know that marijuana itself is not legal, but is hemp? I didn't think it was legal, so why would the USDA go with it? But I don't know.
I don't have an answer. Senator Ware possibly has an answer.
My understanding, and it's really clear in my mind anyway, there's no fuzziness here, that there's a crisp, hard line between industrial hemp, which is what this bill is about, and what we typically call marijuana or other cannabis, and that is the 0.3% THC quantity in it. And so, and many other states are using the USDA.
Further discussion on the motion to amend. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was changed in the 2018 Farm Bill. I just wanted to share that. And that's why I think the legislature in 2019 then provided for this, but we're still sitting at the same fees, I believe, that we had back in 2019. And I want to say the highest year that we maybe had, I want to say 180, 200, approximately 200 producers, and now we're down to 26. I think we need to really look into this more. And I think there's lots of different barriers as far as hemp is very rough on equipment. I don't know that we are able to export it out of state. I have a lot more questions. I mean, I think I could go through a whole nother hour of questions investigating the whole issue. But I understand you're trying to get a Senate position on this. But I don't think that keeping those fees higher is going to do anything to improve Kansas's position in the hemp industry. So I would support lowering them and figuring out other ways for the industry to support its own inspections.
Further discussion? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going from the 500 to the 800, I know when we talk about the numbers and how they've went down, I know part of this coming down was to see if that would help with that kind of thing. So this is not really a big decision. It's probably a big decision to them, you know, on the other side. So I have no problem in doing what you want to do, but as you go to conference, you know, I'd sure lean towards the other side. That's my opinion, so.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, we shall vote on the motion. The motion again is to change the $500 figure on page 3 and on page 4, both of those figures, to $800. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion appears to carry. Motion does carry. We are back on the bill. Senator Fagg.
We need a second on that.
We had a second.
We had one?
Senator McGinn.
Okay, I didn't see that. All right, thank you.
And I do have, committee, for your consideration, a balloon, and it's really simple, straightforward again, but the reviser has put together a balloon, so we shall pass that out. I will just mention it while she's passing it out because it's simple, straightforward. Go ahead and hand out on page 2, the 3-year. In the law currently, you will notice on page 2, section C, paragraph A2, or paragraph 2. Anyway, a hemp producer who negligently violates this section of any rules and regulations adopted hereunto 3 times in a 5-year period shall be ineligible to produce industrial hemp for a period of 5 years beginning on the date of the 3rd violation. I don't know, I wasn't here when the legislation passed. 5 years, 3 times in 5 years, if they are violating that frequently, it's kind of like, why in the world are we allowing them to continue to be a producer? So I'm saying, let's tighten it up a little bit. Let's go 3 times in 3 years. And because, or the reason or the thinking behind this is shorten down the period that makes them ineligible to be a producer. If I just think we're giving them too much time. And then so I'm going to stay with what I've got. There was just some suggestion, committee, that we change the 5 years on line 15, my proposal, and on line 16, but this would just disallow them growing for 5 years. So it's three violations. So again, you've got a balloon in front of you. I'm going to make a motion to get us moving forward to change the 3-year period. So basically, it's saying that if you have had violated the law 3 times in a 3-year period, you're going to be ineligible to produce industrial hemp for 5 years, rather than stretching out that time of giving them 3 strikes before they're out. If personally, I'd make it, you violate it 1 time, you can't, but giving them a little bit of grace, allowing 3 times in 3 years, and then if you're a habitual offender violating, I think we need to allow you to discontinue being a producer for 5 years. So I'm going to make a motion to change the 5 years, to adopt the balloon, the 5-year to 3 years. Is there a second? Okay, I thought you were seconding, Senator Dahl.
I'll second.
Seconded by Senator Fagg for discussion purposes, apparently. Senator Dahl.
When you think of law, we're talking about like feeding stocks and such to cattle, right? That'd be like one of the violations. Is that correct? Mr. Chairman?
I do, Senator Dahl, I don't know what all the violations are.
I believe that would be one of them. In my mind, which means nothing, except to me maybe, my wife sometimes, that it's a bad law. So you have all the stock here, and this is full of protein, and you're supposed to burn it. And I think there's somewhere, I don't have the front of me, you know, in the democracy, if there is something that's not right and you don't fight it, that's not democracy. You know, so I can't support this because I think we should use the whole plant instead of, if it's not harming anyone, and the THC is at a particular level, and you can use the whole plant in a good way, why is that against the law to begin with? And then we're going to ban them from raising a crop when they, you know, environmentally and fiscally and everything else, it doesn't make sense. So whatever. I just wanted to get that out there.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm trying to understand how this would actually work. And I think rather than restricting it, you're sort of making it more possible for people to make violations. So if I figured out my time frame and my calendar, I could now do 2 times in 3 years, and then I would start over, and I could do 2 times in the next 3 years. But if I had 5 years, I would have to wait. I could do it 2 times, and I'd have to wait till the end of that 5 years to do it again. I don't know if does this make sense to you? So essentially what you're doing, if you say 3 times in a 3-year period, then once I've done it twice, I just wait till the end of that 3 years, then I can start over.
Francisco, I understand your argument, but if you're violating the law, which we have the statute, I don't think most of our producers are going to violate the law on a regular basis. But for the bad actors, if we have any that do, we should, and I understand your argument, but go ahead, Senator Francisco.
So if you did it 3 times in the first 3 years, you would have violated it 3 times during the 5 years.
Correct.
So there's no, if it is a bad actor and you do it 3 times, you know, in 2020, 2021, 2022, you're already out. You don't wait for the 5 years. You've already violated it 3 times. So I think it would make more sense if you want to do this to say 3 times in 6 years, because, well, yeah, that actually makes it tighter than reducing that time. I'm trying to explain this, but I do really think if you did it 3 times in a 3-year period, you would have also done it 3 times in that 5-year period, and you would have already been facing that ineligibility.
The intent of the amendment is to disallow that producer to continue growing sooner rather than later. Senator Francisco.
So explain to me, if they've already violated it 3 times, they would have to stop. You don't wait till the end of the 5 years to say you violated it 3 times. So I think as soon as they violate it that 3rd time, whether it's in a 3-year period or whether it's in a 5-year period, they would stop that 3rd time.
I understand your argument. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On this point and many others, frankly, when we're talking about the current situation with the hemp industry, I'm uncomfortable with how often we are looking at farmers as potential criminals rather than growers of a crop. I guess that puts it pretty succinctly.
Further discussion on the motion to amend? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't know what all items, is this just concerning their testing and annual inspections? Because in section 6, it says annual inspections, a random sample. So if annual inspections aren't required for everybody, you might miss the lawbreakers every time. You don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what are the exact violations of growing requirements that they could be cited for, and what are the fines? I have a lot of more questions.
There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and hopefully, if this does go across the Senate floor and it is adopted, the House will non-concur with the amendments, and committee, I feel like the more amendments we have, the less likely they are to concur, which allows for further discussion on the topic of the legislation to try to make certain that we have it correct. That's honestly where I'm going. Because they might look at 800 and say, okay, well, I'm like you, Senator Straub, I've got several questions still after the hearing and then reading the legislation, considering it. Senator Straub, the floor is still yours if you wish to continue. Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we'll go ahead and vote on the motion to amend. The motion is to change the 5-year period on line 15 of page 2 to a 3-year. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion appears to fail. Motion does fail. One more balloon committee, and this has to do, I will ask that the balloon be handed out. It's also on page 2. Again, we're dealing with a producer who negligently violates this section or any rules and regulations adopted. I'm starting on line 4. Herein shall not be subject to any state or local criminal enforcement action, but shall comply with the following corrective action as applicable. A reasonable date by which the hemp producer shall correct the negligent violation. I think reasonable date is a little bit up to interpretation, so I thought to clarify the language, a reasonable date of not more than 90 days from the negligent violation. So basically we're saying giving guidelines to the agency to make that reasonable date happen within 90 days of the violation. And so I'm going to make a motion so we can then discuss the amendment, provided we get a second. I'm going to move that we amend House Bill, Senate House substitute for House Bill 2168 with the balloon of, as presented. Is there a second? Second by Senator Francisco. Discussion on the motion. Senator Francisco.
Mr. Chair, I agree that this is more specific than a reasonable date.
Further discussion. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sitting here thinking about you have a crop season, you know, when you say 90 days. I don't know how that fits into that part of it. I don't know, the violation from when it happens to the crop's already out of the ground and gone kind of thing. So reasonable date might be a lot shorter. So I don't know. I can't envision where it'd be over 90 days, but it could. So
I'm with you, Senator Fag. I don't know what the reasonable date would be. It could be, and I guess I want to make it uniform. It could be for you, being a good guy, it could be 180 days. Someone like me, they may say, hey, you've only got 30 days. I don't know. I'm sure they're consistent, but this puts it into statute. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not sure that I understand what the reasonable date or 90 days violations refers to. Can we tell that?
Violation, do you wish to?
So any possible negligent violation within the whole hemp structure, then, is that?
I'm going to allow our reviser the opportunity to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Subsection C, which is the subsection that we're in here, states a hemp producer who negligently violates this section, so that would be 23906, or any rules and regulations adopted under this section, will have to comply with the following corrective actions. So if they do negligently violate this section or any rules and regulations adopted under this section, this says they would correct the violation within a reasonable date, but the balloon would specify that that reasonable date has to be within 90 days of the violation.
Okay, well, that's pretty non-specific as to what the violations would be. It's very encompassing. Honestly, there are so many issues that the hemp growers have to deal with. I think that may be why they said reasonable rather than specifying, because some things might be a very short time, some things might be a much longer time. And to just pick a date might be just as onerous on the industry as saying reasonable date, you know. So that's my thought.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I'm reading through the requirements of the plan, you know, it says a procedure for testing, a procedure for effective disposal, fees for licenses, standards for authorized seed or clone plants, a procedure for the creation of documentation. To me, those seem like things that if you hadn't adopted that procedure, they're saying, please just adopt this procedure. And I hope that it's something that could be, you know, other procedures to meet the requirements. So it seems more that you've set aside standards that you're following and not necessarily specific things you're doing, but that you have adopted a plan that addresses these requirements. And it seems to me a plan could be adopted within 90 days.
Further discussion on the motion to amend? Seeing none, we will vote on the motion that you have been presented. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion appears to pass. Motion does pass. Committee, what are your wishes with House Bill 2168? Any further amendments or motions on the legislation? Seeing none, it looks like we will.
No.
I know, but need to move a little, get your hand a little bit. There you go. Senator Fag.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we move substitute for House Bill 2168 as amended favorably out of committee.
Motion by Fag, Senator Fag, seconded by Senator Ware. On discussion on the motion. Senator Dahl.
You can put all the paint you want on an ugly house. It's still an ugly house. How I feel about this bill. I think this bill is prohibited our producers to take something that could be very useful for our people and be profitable for the producer when, if a lot of producers are struggling. I just wanted to get that out there.
Senator Dahl, I appreciate that. Bear in mind, if this legislation does not pass, the law does not change, and the fees remain where they are, which are higher than what we've got in this legislation or what the House has passed. So, and I understand your position. I'm not disrespecting it. I just wanted to point out that if we don't pass this, nothing changes. Further discussion on the motion to pass out favorably as amended. Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Committee, we have a bill that we heard prior to turnaround, and so I'm going to ask that that legislation be handed out. It may be still in your folder. It may not be. That was Senate Bill 389. Senate Bill 389 had to do with trespass and falsification on an application for employment, particularly as it relates to animal health. This was legislation that was brought to us by the Kansas Livestock Association. It seems to be important legislation for the good of the industry. And so what I'm going to ask the committee, if the committee wishes, if it's the will of the committee, is to strip the contents of House Bill 2047. House Bill 2047 is a leftover bill from last session that the previous chair didn't touch. The current chair didn't feel it was necessary, so it's a shell that is going to be sitting there with nothing in it. So I'm going to propose that we strip the contents of House Bill, and by the way, they should be at your desk, committee, the two pieces of legislation. Strip the contents of House Bill 2047 and insert the contents of Senate Bill 389 and make it a substitute bill. So I'm going to make that motion, and then we can have discussion if we get a second. And the reason I'm doing this is I really don't want to lose the legislation, and I think that it's important to the industry due to a court decision. So I'm going to make a motion that we strip the contents of House Bill 2047, insert the contents of Senate Bill 389, and call it Senate substitute for House Bill 2047. Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Senator Francisco. Discussion on the motion, committee. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we heard Senate Bill 389, it was, as you explained, because there was a court case. And I don't think it's helpful to have a statute that cannot be used. And so I think the industry was responsible in tightening these rules and making sure that we weren't violating free speech. So I understand the importance to the industry and appreciate your motion, and you're finding a way to move this forward.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is the one where it stripped out the language of their intent for being on the property, correct, Tamara? Yeah, okay, thank you.
It also had to do with falsification on a job application. Okay. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, which the motion is to strip the language of 2047 and insert the language of 389, make it a substitute bill. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Motion carries. So we have a substitute bill. Committee, what is your wishes for Senate substitute for House Bill 2047? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the committee recommend favorably House Bill 2047 as amended.
Or substitute.
Or, oh, the substitute. you're very good about making sure that our motions are correct, so I thank you for that.
All right. There's a motion to pass the bill out favorably. Is there a second? Second by Senator Fagg. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Committee, that is all that I had on the agenda for today. I appreciate your work during this session. This will be our last meeting unless the president authorizes us to have an additional meeting, which I do not expect. You can take your folders with you. And again, I have appreciated chairing the committee. It's been an honor and a privilege. A lot of extra time involved, but the committee has been good to work with, agree and disagree. I thought it's always been respectful, and I appreciate that. I have nothing further for the committee, so we are adjourned.